This is a video essay about the 1989 Kryzsztof Kieslowski TV series, The Decalogue, which I first saw in 1990. And sure, I know this is a TV show, but it's also kind of 10 short films. And Stanley Kubrick once wrote that The Decalogue was the only film masterpiece he could think of. One of the many things he admired about the films was how you couldn't see the ideas coming, and it was only much later that you realized how profoundly they had touched your heart. I mean, that sounds pretty good, right? And we're going to start by talking about something which you're probably totally expecting, which is the Carl Reiner film The Jerk, obviously, because in 1987 my family went to Skipwith in Yorkshire. My younger brother and I were in a room that had a small portable television. Now this portable TV didn't have buttons, it had a dial like this that you turned like a safecracker, and when you turned the dial you'd get static, 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 and then a channel would slowly appear. But you never knew what the channel was. Sure, it could have only been either BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, or Channel 4, because those were all the channels that existed at the time, but there were no idents in the corner of the screen back then, so you could be watching for a really long time before you worked out which channel it was. And it's a weird experience not knowing what you're watching, trust me. On this occasion we turned the TV on, turned that dial, found a movie. We didn't know which channel it was, we didn't know what the movie was, but we settled in and it was The Jerk. And it may have been the funniest thing that either of us had ever seen by that point. What a trip. He hates cans.
He hates these cans! Stay away from the cans!
This was my introduction to Steve Martin, and afterwards I looked him up in this very book right here, because if you wanted to know what other movies someone had been in, this was genuinely the only way you could find out. And I made my way through this list. Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, All of Me, The Man with Two Brains. Oh boy, what a filmography. It took me a long time to find these films, and all the while new Steve Martin films were coming out. It wasn't the main task of my life, kind of a background task that I went back to when the opportunity arose. But there was one film here in the list that had a title that really struck a chord with me for some reason, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And then, as luck would have it, Virgin Megastore in Marble Arch started selling VHS films for £5 a pop, and while browsing the shelves there one day, I found the very Steve Martin film with the great title that I hadn't seen yet sitting on the shelf. Steve Martin reunited with his co-star from The Jerk, Bernadette Peters. This is bound to be a laugh riot, right? Well, it isn't, but it is fascinating. It's a bleak as all hell drama set in the Depression following a music sheet salesman played by Steve Martin who hates his life. What it's known for is using actual recordings of songs from that era that the cast mime along to. It's a great idea, and imagine my surprise when Christopher Walken turned up to do a tap dance. After watching Pennies from Heaven, I was like, what the hell was that? And I read the back of the video cassette box, and one name jumped out at me as the most likely name that would answer my what the hell was that question. And that name was Dennis Potter. I looked him up, read about the singing detective. Okay, this makes sense. Then I saw track 29 and Dreamchild and Brimstone and Treacle. Okay, putting a picture together of this guy. And then, as luck would have it, by this point, it was 1989. And kismet of all kismet, Dennis Potter had a new TV show starting, Black Eyes. And I watched the whole damn thing, even though I was way too young to be watching something like that. Now in the same year, the UK was abuzz with news of these two Polish films that were coming out. A short film about killing and a short film about love. And sure, again, not really aimed at someone as young as I was, but after the journey I'd just been on, taking me from The Jerk to Black Eyes, I was more than happy to go see a Polish film at the cinema. I liked it, I didn't love it, it made me feel a bit sick, which is quite definitely the point, but there was something difficult to describe about being a young teen and seeing something like this at the cinema, surrounded by grown-ups. Sure, there's the illicit thrill of being too young to legally see something at the cinema, but more than that, it was about seeing the world beyond your own borders, seeing that there was more to life than the UK perspective. There were other places, other people, and that really felt exhilarating. And then, on Sunday, the 6th of May, 1990, at 9 PM, sitting in front of my own small portable TV in my room, I heard the announcer on BBC Two introducing a TV series I'd never heard of, but which was made by the guy who'd made a short film about killing. This was episode 1 of a 10-part series, and each episode was a standalone 1-hour film that asked questions about where ethics were and where humanity was at the tail end of the 20th century. And this was The Decalogue. That first episode hit me in such an unexpected way. Everything was so similar and yet so very, very different too. The cramped inner city lifestyle, the small spaces, the fact that everyone, everywhere smoked all the time. Things that were reflected in the environment I grew up in. Then there were the subtle differences too. too. The elevator, the interiors, and the milk. Milk is a big part of your life when you're a kid. And in the UK, we had our milk delivered by a milkman in bottles. By 1990, milk bottles still existed, but they were on the wane. A new player had entered the game, and that player was Tetra Pak, a Swedish company founded by Ruben Rausing, which had started taking over the world with their innovative packaging. Who needs bottles? The future is here, and it's a tetrahedron, kind of. Remember It'll Be Alright on the Night, that Dennis Norden show where they would show TV and film bloopers? One of their oft-repeated clips was from Austrian television, one of the Rausing family members showing people how easy Tetra Pak was to open, and doing a terrible job of it. The very first time I saw this clip, I knew exactly what he was doing wrong, because I'd opened an innumerable number of Tetra Pak cartons by this point. Side note, that several years later, the grandson of Tetra Pak founder Ruben Rausing, Hans Christian Rausing, who had a checkered history with substance abuse, was arrested and a search of his home was undertaken. In one room, the police discovered the body of Hans Christian Rausing's wife, dead, wrapped in blankets and bin bags. Apparently, he simply couldn't deal with the sudden death of his wife, which had come about likely due to her own substance abuse issues, and he bundled her up, left her in a room, which he then sealed up with tape. He sat in another room and continued an ever-spiraling habit of substance abuse. Can you imagine going through something like that? What the hell? Anyway, milk. So, yes, there's a lot of milk in the Decalogue, and it's one of those things that appears in multiple films, kind of tying everything together, grounding everything in the real world that we know and live in. So familiar, but so different to how life was in the UK. And that is how the whole show hit me over and over again. How similar, but how different. And for those who might not know, the Decalogue is a contemporary version of the Ten Commandments. Each film summarizes or examines one of the Ten Commandments, and there is some fun to be had in arguing about which commandment matches which film. But anyway, film 1. A father lives with his son. Maybe the father is single, maybe he isn't. His wife is abroad, true, but is she coming back? We're never completely sure. At one point, he goes out for the night, leaving the son alone, and he puts aftershave on. And then there's this strange movement that he has with the son's tutor. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe his wife's coming back one day. The father is a mathematician. He loves maths, has faith in the computers that help him work out equations. He believes that everything in life can be understood by measuring. The father has a sister, the son's aunt, and while the father is all about what can be seen and measured, this woman is all about what can be felt. These two adults occupy very different roles for the boy. It's winter. The nearby pond is frozen over. The son wants to skate on the pond, but the father is not sure whether it's safe. So he performs tests and an equation based on the temperatures they've seen over the last few days, and the equation rules that the ice is safe. Everyone keeping up so far? As you watch these events unfold, you may notice that you rarely see the characters in the same shot as the computer screen. That is a shot that you see quite a lot, an over-the-shoulder shot of a person using a computer with the screen in front of them. But in the Decalogue, it's humanized. It's really just the faces of the people, lit green, with occasional inserts of the screen itself. Why do you think that might be? You see, what I'd really like to introduce here are what I'm going to call the first two pillars of filmmaking, or the first two and most important commandments of filmmaking. I want to kind of get away from talking about the story so much and instead get you to think about how things are done and why decisions are made. The first pillar is this: how close is the camera to the thing you are filming and why? This is choice number one in filmmaking. Are you far away or are you up close? Or are you somewhere in between? And why? Always the why. What is it that you feel when up close that you don't feel when far away, and vice versa? Obviously, you're often closer for dialogue or reactions or moments of high emotion because it's easier to understand how people feel when you're close to them. But then sometimes you need to be far away because maybe you need to understand what's all around a person, or maybe you need to isolate them to see them alone, or maybe it's something else. And sure, we're up close for dialogue and emotions, but what happens if we go even closer still, getting uncomfortably close? What then? And what happens if we stay far away from a person feeling their big emotion and go close to someone blank? What then? Trust me, you can never overthink this point too much.
Ścigamy się?
Możemy.
A chcesz jakieś fory?
Nie, dziś nie. No.
Start!
And the second pillar is this: is there movement or stillness? why. And when I say movement, I mean either movement in front of the camera, meaning movement of the actors, or movement of the camera itself. So do the actors move? Where? Why? Does the camera follow them, or does it stay still? Or maybe the performers stay still and the camera moves, but again, where and why? Sometimes, or usually even, camera movement is motivated by the people it's watching. It follows them. It chases them. It goes everywhere they go. But sometimes the camera has a life of its own, a mind of its own, seeking out something else, going somewhere new. There are a million things to consider when making a film. The lighting, the costumes, the sets, the sound, the lenses, the everything. But these two basic pillars, proximity, distance, and movement, stillness, are, IMO, the foundation from which everything else is built. And if you want to make films, you have to know why you're making the choices you're making. And there could be a large number of reasons why, and you don't ever have to explain these to anyone, but you have to know what they are. And I don't want to get too mathematical about this. Sometimes you do things because you have to. Look at these moments from the case of the Bloody Iris. You film things from a distance and look at all these people standing around watching, going, "Hey, you making a movie?" in Italian. You go close and hell, there could be 100 people standing around and staring, but we can't see them anymore. Sometimes things involve a lot of thought and sometimes they're super simple. Let's not pretend that we can understand the world by measuring it. But all the same, when you're watching the Decalogue, or in fact anything, pay attention to when we're far from people and when we're close, when we're moving and when we're still, and think about why that might be. Anyway, the equation proves that the pond is safe to skate on. Everything in life can be understood and measured, and then another day happens. And here we have another lesson about filmmaking from the Decalogue, the way Kieslowski films something you can't see by filming something you can see. The father is working when something happens, and this man who prides himself on understanding the world around him, who is convinced that everything about the world can be understood and measured, is suddenly deeply confused and does not understand what he's looking at. Worth noting that these holy moments that occur from time to time in the Decalogue, these meaningful close-ups of things, are very much a Kieslowski thing. Remember the sugar cube in 3 Colors Blue and how Kieslowski experimented with different brands of sugar cubes to find one that absorbed liquid at exactly the rate he wanted the shot to go on for? Man, I miss him. And sure, you can say that we've seen this kind of thing before in other films, a foreboding or a warning, a portent of doom, something that sends a message that something is very wrong. Probably most well known in the beginning of Don't Look Now, but that film uses cross-cutting to give us a 360 understanding of what is happening. Cutting between the parents inside and the children outside, showing us 2 different places at the same time. Cross-cutting is probably most well known for being used in the Star Wars films, in the big finales, where we see that this and this and this and this are all happening at the same time, but in different places and with different influences on each other. But in the Decalogue, there is no cross-cutting. We're locked into the experience of life the father is going through, and we know full well how much this man needs evidence before making decisions, and we watch in real time as he gets first one datum of information and then another and then another, and we know the equation he's working on here. My son wanted to go ice skating. I said the ice was safe. The ice has broken. Where is my son? Later, the father has joined a crowd gathered at the pond, and the multitude watches in silence as the firemen search the water. The woman appears, finds her brother, and we watch from afar as the miracle of a dead body is taken from the lake, and the entire crowd get down on their knees, all except for one person. And how do we see this event unfold? Like this. When should we be close to someone? When should we be far away? The Decalogue was the first time I ever saw Poland, and I absolutely loved it. Like I said, so different, but so similar. The very next day, the 7th of May, 1990, I sat in a language class at school in room N4, and I felt different. I'd seen another way of life. I knew that other things were possible. Things that were far away and out of sight were happening, and they were real, if not more real than the things I experienced directly. After watching the Decalogue, I kept on this weird film journey, going from this place to other places, and on my path, I became more and more interested in what could be said without words, a cinema of movement and mood rather than dialogue and exposition. And because of that, in 2015, I was invited to the Royal Opera House to watch the premiere of Wolfworks, a ballet by Wayne McGregor with music by Max Richter, and everyone loves Max Richter. It's 3 different pieces, and the opening piece, I Now, I Then, was really the pinnacle of this idea of storytelling through movement for me, covering different times and different emotions, and nothing is explained and everything is felt. And then there was the interval. The Royal Opera House has a no filming rule, but before everything starts and in the intervals, everyone has their phones out and is filming everything, and you can see why. It is a hell of a place. And I was looking around at all the people, and my eye was drawn to the boxes up high, because I was wondering who sat up there. And who do you think I saw sitting there, looking down straight at me, locking eyes with me? That's right, of course you know who it was. Who else could it have been? It was Hans Christian Rousing, in the flesh. 2 storylines that were never meant to cross over, suddenly staring each other in the face for the briefest moment. The Decalogue was a lesson in just how good TV could be, a lesson in how good filming on location can be. And after making the 10-part TV series, Kieslowski made The Double Life of Veronique, and then his Treacle films, and that was it. He retired. He had said all the things he wanted to say in film, and he retired from cinema to turn his hand to writing. But of course we never got to see what happened next, because he passed away in '96, leaving us all with nothing more than the question of what could have been. You just never know what's going to happen next. And it's crazy to me to think that Catching the Jerk on TV one day ended up with me watching the Decalogue, which led me on to, where am I now exactly? And what about you? How did you end up here, watching this video? What actions did you take in your life that ended up leading you here? Maybe there was another path we could have taken, you and me, one that would have led us somewhere else, allowed us to be someone else, and maybe that other path could have allowed us to even be better as people. Or maybe things were always supposed to be this way. Maybe this is the only path we were ever going to be on, and maybe this is as good as we can ever be.